forgot that already. It's great to see so many people here tonight. It's been a long time since we've had a really good gathering like this. We've had some meetings over the last year in person, but finally it looks like things are coming back a little bit more towards the normal, which is wonderful. Why are you doing that?
I figured you didn't care. Thanks, Kelly.
Wait a minute, I have to give people online a full effect. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
There we go. That's for Lloyd and Greg. Well, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker for the evening, Kelly Beatty. Kelly has been to Skyscrapers a number of times. He's a longtime friend of ours, always a great speaker. And tonight he's going to be talking about Stonehenge. And I saw this talk a few months ago at the Maine Astronomy Retreat and Symposium. And I thought it was a really great talk. It'd be good for our holiday meeting, which is why Kelly is here. What?
Sign language. In my. Oh, thank you.
So I thought it'd be great if Kelly could come, and since I saw it 4 months ago at my age, I've already forgotten what he said, so it's going to be like a new talk again tonight. So Kelly, for those of you that may not know his background, it's going in and out. Kelly has been explaining the science and wonder of astronomy to the public since 1974. That's when he joined the staff. What is this?
I don't know.
It might be because I'm moving.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry about this going in and out, but he joined the staff of Sky and Telescope, and he's an award-winning writer and communicator. He specializes in planetary science and space exploration. After 43 years of pounding the keyboard, in 2018, he retired from full-time work, but remains actively involved with Sky and Telescope tours and other projects. Occasionally, he gets interviewed on the Weather Channel and National Public Radio, and he holds a bachelor's degree from the California Institute of Technology and a master's from Boston University. He also has an asteroid named after him, number 2925, and that was named on the occasion of his marriage in 1983. How did you arrange that? Well, maybe you could tell us after. And in 1986, he was chosen as one of the 100 semifinalists for NASA's Journalists in Space program. So a lot of experience. Very excited to hear this talk tonight. And I want to give Kelly a warm skyscraper welcome and thank you for coming down.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be back. Great to be back in person. About that asteroid. I went to Caltech. And one of the people that I met, two of the people I met there were Gene Shoemaker and Eleanor Helene, who at the time were just starting the search for near-Earth objects, for satellite, for asteroids that could potentially strike the Earth. And Glow approached me to ask whether I'd consider being one of her observing assistants for this search. And by that point in my life, I had decided that spending my nights out in the cold was not my ideal career. Great for a hobby. It's not great if you have to do it every night. So I declined, but we remained good friends. And in the years after, we stayed in touch. And when we got married, Glow had the way asteroid discoveries work. You know, you can name them, but you can't name them after yourself. And a lot of the programs that discover a lot of asteroids, they end up with a pile of asteroids that have not been named because they haven't gone to the government to suggest names yet. So once 2925 had been numbered, that is to say, it had gone around the sun 3 times, so its orbit was secured, there was no chance of its getting lost. It gets a number, and once it's numbered, it can be named. And Glow honored my wife and me with 2925. And I run into a lot of people with asteroids named after them. None of them have a number as low as mine, so that's good. So the story there is that when Cheryl and I got married, we had this gift of an asteroid given to us. And the priest at our wedding announced to the congregation, I want you all to know that Kelly and Cheryl have been honored. They've got a star named after them. Some of you are old enough to remember the International Star Registry, which I guess continues. And so a big round of applause. And then at the reception afterward, people would come up to me and say, oh, Kelly, congratulations. on having the star named after you. And I said, no, actually, it wasn't a star, it was an asteroid. And they paused a moment and said, oh, well, that's okay too. All right, well, before I get started, I have two questions for you, or two comments. The first is that you might not remember this, but 2 years ago, when we were all swamped with pandemia, we were largely stuck at home. And as counterintuitive as this might seem, it was a great time for the growth of amateur astronomy. Because people were stuck at home, they rediscovered the night sky, telescope sales went through the roof. And it was a perfect storm in a bad way, because remember the supply chain problems that were initially so severe, all those container ships stuck off the coast of California, that's where all the telescopes were that were coming from China. So there was a shortage of telescopes to begin with. And then everybody went running out to Orion and High Point Scientific and all the places that we go to buy telescopes, and they all wanted beginner level telescopes. I had people that I know, like in the Boston TV station, circle, the anchors were calling me, Kelly, I desperately need a telescope for my niece. Where do I go? And so what I take from that is that there were millions of telescopes sold during the pandemic to brand new people getting into astronomy. Elijah, this is Elijah, right?
Yes, sir.
Do you have a telescope?
See. Yes.
When did you buy it?
I got it for Christmas 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Ding.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, like Elijah, there are millions of also here. Okay. So here's the thing. Your next generation, we all worry about this all the time, do we not? Where will the next generation of amateur astronomers come from? They're out there. They've got telescopes, they've got interest, and our job collectively is to find them and bring them in. I suspect your club has grown in the last couple of years. The same for the amateur telescope to the Boston Chemistry Club. This is great. It would help if the average age of the new members wasn't 50 and it was more closer to 15, but we'll take anybody we can get, and it's a great time to be out there and be interested in amateur astronomy. So capitalize on that while you can. Second thing I want to ask is, how many of you are individual members of the International Dark Sky Association? Raise your hand, please. Individual members. I see 3 besides me. That's pretty darn sad. If you think about it, the IDA has roughly 3,000 paying members, and there are roughly 100,000 amateur, a 250,000, probably closer to 300,000. We'll round up to 300,000. It's a good round number. 3,000 members, 300,000 amateurs. Sorry. Oh, thank you. 300,000 amateur astronomers, 3,000 members. Roughly, that means that only 1 in every 100 amateur astronomers is a member of the IDA. And guess what? You're not far off of that statistic, okay? And yet we, as a group, are the ones who stand the most to gain or lose from the battle against light pollution. And so my challenge to you, after we're done here tonight, is to go home, become members of the IDA, and here's why. I am a very active member of the IDA in Massachusetts. I'm sponsoring state legislation. I'm helping towns. I'm appearing at a council meeting. There's only one of me. The whole entire staff of the IDA is about 9 people. And yet it casts this huge shadow. It has outsized importance in this very important environmental crisis that we're facing with light pollution. The more money the IDA has, the more staff it can fund, the more battles that can be fought. And so that's my challenge to you, is to think really hard about becoming a member of the IDA, each and every one of you, to fight the good fight so that your dark sky sites in your backyard don't get bright as fast. I can't keep them from getting bright at all, but to curb this scourge of light pollution. We're in the midst of a once in a multi-generational change with LEDs of the way we light the night. This hasn't happened since the 1950s and 60s. And these LEDs will last a long time. So it's imperative to get the right ones installed will now while we have a chance to do so. That's all I'm gonna say about that. All right, so tonight I'm gonna start sharing my screen here as best I can. Share sound, keep that part going. Harry has started screen sharing, good. So far so good. We start the slideshow. And it should be wonderful. It never happens this easily. Okay, this is a fun talk. This talk was a couple of years in the making, and you'll see why very soon. Most of us have an idea of what Stonehenge is. It's a pile of rocks in a circle out somewhere in the middle of the English plain. Oh yeah, and the summer solstice sunrise has druids all over the place. And that's mostly true. But it's turned out to be much more than that. And it also turns out that within the last couple of years, we have learned a tremendous amount about Stonehenge and its origin. And this is therefore that story. So we're going to start by getting an understanding. This is what we're going to cover tonight. It's not just when and how it was built, but why it was built, and where it's been discovered recently. So let's get the time frame set here. We're talking about BC times, prehistoric times in some sense. The Mesolithic period in history was the beginning of the Stone Age, the use of stone tools, just, to bash the head of an antelope or something like that. As we move into the Neolithic, then those stone tools become more sophisticated. They're chipped to have edges, they become scrapers, they become axes, and so forth. Late Neolithic is characterized by a sort of transition from being hunter-gatherers to actually being agrarians, staying in the same place, growing crops, so forth. And then the Copper Age, Bronze Age, that's sort of self-explanatory. And so most of what happens in the Stone Age is early to happens in Neolithic times. So who were these people in England? Not who you think. The first inhabitants of England probably looked like this. A very unusual combination of dark skin and blue eyes. How do we know this? Because in Cheddar, England, about a century ago, was discovered the corpse, a well-preserved corpse, what became known as Cheddar Man. And only recently, with very sophisticated DNA techniques, they've been able to reconstruct what they think Cheddar Man looked like. So this is a bust in the Natural History Museum in England, in London, and the team has gone to recreate that. So these were the first inhabitants of England. These were the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers in southern England. And you're saying, well, okay, so then what happened? Well, it turns out that it wasn't always the case that England and the British Islands were islands. During the last major ice age, roughly 10,000 BC, so much ice was piled up on the land that the strait, right, the English Channel and much more to the east was dry land. And so anybody could cross into England freely, back and forth, from what was continental Europe. And so it turns out that during this ice age, or the late stages of it, while that land bridge still existed, a lot of not hunter-gatherers, but a lot of farmers, early Neolithic farmers, came from mostly Eastern Mediterranean, maybe Turkey, and inhabited England and displaced the hunter-gatherers that had lived there. So that's where a lot of the origin of the current English are. They were farmers, so they cleared a lot of the forest, and there were great plains, meadows, and fields, and so forth. These are obviously depictions. Whoever they were, these people loved to make things out of stone. They had stone cairns, they had stone circles, they had hedges, which are basically a circular ditch, as monuments all over the British Isles. You can see the little dots there. And so let me just give you a flavor for some of the places that were erected in that period of time. One of my favorites is actually outside of Dublin, not far from Dublin. If any of you ever go to Ireland, go to Dublin, you should visit this place. It's called Newgrange. It's in the Brún Boyne, which is basically the bend of the Boyne River. That's what that means in Gaelic. And so it's a huge earthen mound, roughly the size of a football field. You can see the people down here. I'll try to use my cursor. I think that will be, if my cursor will work. Here we go. Right. You see the cursor, kind of. It's not being, oh, here we go. All right, down here, it's just a little bit of a delay. Those are people, okay, down there at the bottom. And so you get the sense of the scale of this. This is a giant cemetery. The dead were buried here, and that opening faces toward the rising of the sun, not at the summer solstice, but the winter solstice.
Wait a second, I'm gonna turn this off.
Good idea. And so on the few days around the winter solstice, the sunlight streams through this narrow passageway, which you can go into and visit. And you can see the inner burial chamber, which is quite small. Pretty remarkable. Great place. Newgrange. Elsewhere in the British Isles, especially in the northern end, are some interesting monuments that are fun to visit. This is one of my favorites. This is the Standing Stones of Callanish. It's on the Isle of Lewis, where you can see the pin up there. It's way up there. You're gonna want to get there. But when you do get there, you'll be the only person. There's no entrance fee. It's like a little like cattle turnstile where you go in, you're just clicking to see how many people visit. And a short story here. Cheryl and I, along with one of my two brothers and his wife, went to the Isle of Lewis, which is where I took this picture. And the year fee was 2000, who knows, 2012, I think, or 13. Oh, okay. We were younger then. And the reason we were there was that because there was going to be an annular eclipse at sunrise from this location. And I had this dreamy vision of taking a picture of the rising annular eclipsed sun with all of these stones in the foreground in silhouette. Fantastic. This is taken the night before the eclipse. I was screwed because I've been watching a clearing crossing the Atlantic and it got there too early. It was beautiful at sunset the night before. On the morning of the eclipse, it was raining like there was no tomorrow. I've missed a few eclipses in my time. That one hit me really hard.
That's England for you.
Exactly. Here's another ring of standing stones on Orkney, the Ring of Brodgar, which is actually a circle. It's beautiful territory. This is a fragment of a stone circle in Stennis, also on Orkney. Cheryl and I visited these just this past summer. And so these stone monuments are all over the place. And then, of course, there's Stonehenge, which exceeds all of them, not only in terms of its scale, but its sophistication, as you'll see. Now, Stonehenge is located on the Salisbury Plain. It's roughly 50 miles to the southwest of London, in an area that's undistinguished. It isn't like there's like giant rivers coming together or huge rock formations that would signal this place being special in any way. You can see that it's cleared because the hunter-gatherers cleared all the land, and it's been agrarian ever since, throughout all of modern history. There's nothing special about it. You can see there's a road there crossing nearby.
Don't see a parking lot.
And the reason you don't see a parking lot, his point was that there's no parking lot. The parking lot is over here on the left, outside of the field of view. I'll mention this again. 800,000 people per year visit Stonehenge. And so they're kept off-site, they're bussed in to keep the crowd control, and you can see the pathway. You don't actually get to walk inside along the stones. We'll get to that in a little bit later. And yet, despite the fact that there's nothing distinguishing this area of land, it's very heavily populated with these Neolithic monuments, Mesolithic monuments. Not only is there Stonehenge, which is down there in the lower left corner, there's a big circular henge called Durrington Walls. There's a wood henge, which I'll show you in a couple of seconds. And down there near the bottom center, recently was discovered a site which is colloquially called Blue Stonehenge, That was another site of a stone circle, but the stones are not there anymore, and that's part of the interesting history. So this is an aerial view of Durrington Wall, which is the large crescent-shaped henge or earthwork up there at the top. And then down there in the lower right corner is Woodhenge, or what's left of it. Now, Woodhenge today looks like this. This is where the poles would have been. Those are concrete proxies, if you will, for what would have been a large wooden pillar, a couple of hundred of them. And this is an artist's concept of what Woodhenge might have looked like in its prime. And so we have to start asking ourselves, okay, you can take this tree, you can strip it apart, you can put it in a hole in the ground. Well, why? Why would you do it? And it also turns out that Woodhenge, Stonehenge are almost the same scale. This may be important. We're not sure. It's often thought that these days that maybe Woodhenge, which is located next to Durrington Walls, was a monument to the living, and Stonehenge was a monument to the dead. So some of the earliest depictions of Stonehenge were somewhat fanciful. This is the earliest known from the late 1500s. It shows more of the archways, the giant the stone sarsens. The large stones are called sarsens, intact. Here's another one of watercolor. This had to have been painted before 1797, and the reason is that one of the giant trilithons, as they're called, I think it's that one there on the extreme far left, fell during a storm in 1797. And that's the important thing to remember, that the Stonehenge you see today has had a couple of facelifts. Because over time, and this is true of a lot of the stone monuments in the British Isles, the stones it took a lot of trouble to quarry them and get them in place. And when one monument kind of fell out of use or out of favor, they would raid those stones for use someplace else. And so all of the stones that were originally at Stonehenge are not there now. And many of the ones that are there now are not pretty, they're like on the ground. Well, it turns out that this property was always privately owned in recent times. And for a long time in the 1800s, it was owned by the Antrobus. It came to pass that in the early 1900s, the last surviving the last surviving heir of the Antrobus family had no one to leave it to. So he put up a lot of his estate for auction, including the property that is Stonehenge. And so Sir Cecil Chubb, a wealthy man who lived, I think he was a banker, who actually lived in Salisbury, and his wife, Lady Mary Chubb, seen her with him, they were interested in this auction. And so Sir Cecil said to Mary, I'm going down to the auction. Do you need anything? And she said, yes, I would love a set of curtains if they were available. So he went down to the auction and came back with Stonehenge. Having bought it for £6,600, which is roughly a few $100,000 at current market value. So you can imagine her surprise when she couldn't hang it on her curtains. So Sir Cecil had a plan. He knew by then, it was known, that this was an important archaeological site. They didn't quite understand why it was there, but they knew somebody had gone to a lot of trouble. And so 3 years after buying it, he deeded it back to the British people. And so for the first time, it was no longer in private hands. It was a public property, and the British government, the Antiquities Department, Parks and Rec, if you will, hired Lieutenant Colonel William Hawley and a crew to sort of clean the place up because it had been through centuries of neglect. And he did a lot of work. It was a multi-year project lasting 8 years. It was quite well known, even in the United States. This is from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. It sent a reporter over to check this out. Big, huge project to get some of these stones re-erected. And so what Hawley's crew did was to reset. Many of the sarsens had fallen over, those are the biggest ones. And he repositioned them, stood them up, because the hole was still obvious. But over time, the holes had got filled in somewhat, so they didn't always put them back exactly where they probably should have been. They did excavate the site. This whole area, it looked green in the aerial photos, but that's just the top surface, the topsoil. The underlying rock is chalk, like the White Cliffs of Dover is chalk. And so that will become very important, as we will see in our story. He also discovered around the henge, which goes well outside Stonehenge, a series of 56 holes, which had been known in the 1700s by a guy named John Aubrey who had discovered them, but then the knowledge of them had become lost. So Hawley's team rediscovered them, these Aubrey holes. Well, that wasn't the end of it. Although they went to some great effort, you can see here they've excavated, you can see the chalk surface now here exposed. This large stone is called the heel stone, and it is important in the alignment with the summer solstice, as we'll see. Well, they weren't done. Part of the problem is that there were some Saracens that fell in 1900 and there were more. So another renovation took place in the late 1950s. By now, the archaeological techniques had become a little bit more advanced. They weren't quite as brute force. You can see that they used planking all over the ground to protect the ground. And this was a time when several of the Saracens were repositioned upright and also embedded in concrete so they wouldn't fall over. And they also reset several of the blue stones. Now, the big ones are called Saracens, and the small ones, like this one here, is a blue stone. It's a much smaller stone. And there are a lot of those blue stones, and they are central to the story of Stonehenge. I think this is a place for a video. No. All right. So Stonehenge wasn't built all at once. It was built in several what are recognized as stages over a time period of roughly 800 years. Imagine, as we live from one presidential administration to the next, think how many times our nation's space policy has changed, because it's changed hands since the time of President Kennedy. This, by the way, just for your information, this is the week 50 years ago, when the last astronauts left the moon from Apollo. So imagine a public works project that took 800 years to complete.
You know, Kelly,
Yes.
that's how long projects take on the highways.
Hey, listen, pal, we did the big thing, okay? We know about it. Okay, so it was built in stages. So let's talk about those stages. Here's the first stage. You can see, now you know the terminology, the henge, which is the circular outer part. A henge consists of a hill, circular hill, and a circular ditch. Usually the hill is on the outside. At Stonehenge, it's reversed. The hill is on the inside and the ditch is on the outside. Very interesting. And we don't know why. It's just interesting. The other thing is that this first stage, there were 4 stones erected. These were blue stones, which are smaller than the big ones. And I'll get to why they're called blue stones in a second. No questions will be left unanswered, I promise. You notice there are 4 of them. 2 of them are actually atop a small hill called a barrow. There's an entranceway in the northeast corner, which is typical for these stone monuments. It was always a sort of a parade route because they were used ceremonially for so many things. So 4 stones around this barrow. Now you can imagine this is Stone Age time. There are no shovels, all right? There are no horses. They did this all by hand. So they would take picks like antler picks. Antler horns shaped like a pick to sort of scrape all this stuff into hills. Fortunately, it was pretty soft. The chalk is pretty soft, so they were able to do that. And it was during this first stage. Let me back up a couple of seconds just to point them out. You can see the holes indicated just inside the henge, right? These are the Aubrey holes. And during the first few modern, this is what they look like today. There's one over there at the lower left of that picture. Modern excavations, beginning with with Hawley's time in the early 1900s, found a lot of cremated human remains. And so it was thought that this was a series of stones where families buried their cremated dead. It turns out that was probably really wrong, and you'll see why. Because they were all, and this picture on the left here is from a more recent excavation with really high quality techniques, uncovering one of the articles. You see the scale of it, they're about 1 meter across, they're pretty deep. And you know, you think about it, if you were gonna bury your dead, that's a bigger hole than you need really for that purpose. And so one of the things that became evident during this last excavation is that there were chips of rock inside these offering holes that were consistent for having come from Wales. Wales is the province of the British, Great Britain. That's, you know, the one that sticks out there into the Atlantic for Ireland. Okay, stage number 2 was the introduction of bluestones. Now, these bluestones do not exist anywhere near Stonehenge as it exists today. They had to have come from somewhere, and the nearest place, they're an igneous stone. And they're called bluestones because when they're freshly broken open, or if they're made wet, they sort of have a dark bluish cast. The only place these bluestones could have come from was Wales. They're not anywhere near this part of England. That part of Wales is more than 100 miles away. This is what a bluestone looks like with a human for scale. This is from our trip 3 summers ago. And they're tall and they're heavy. Not nearly as tall as the big sarsen's, but there's still plenty heavy. So the question is, why are they there? They had to have come from Wales, and for many years, they were known to have come from Wales for a long time, close to a century. Exactly where was not known until this paper came out in 2019 by a team led by Mike Parker Pearson, who is the leading Stonehenge researcher in terms of its history and its geologic, how it came to be. And Pearson and his team went to Wales, and there were many outcrops of this particular kind of igneous stone, but they used sort of CSI, geomorphology, geochemistry techniques to determine that they had to have come from a very specific site. This one right here called Candor, excuse me. There were other outcrops there, but this one had this dolerite, which is a geologic name for this stone, was spotted in very distinctive ways, and they pinpointed that. When this paper came out, I've been following Stonehenge for decades, been to it a couple of times, and I contacted Pearson by email. Hello, I'm with Sky Telescope Magazine. I really follow this. We'd love to do some write-up on your work. Can you tell me more about it? Got an email back. Hi, this is Professor Pearson. I'm on medical leave. I won't be able to respond to your email for 3 months. Great. Next day, another email from Professor Pearson. Hi, this is Mrs. Professor Pearson, and how lovely to hear about your interest in Stonehenge. And yes, the place that the stones are is accessible to the public. It's a sheep farm. You go to the farmer's house right here, and by the way, at the end of the road, there's a lovely coffee shop right. Oh, and here's the map that you're going to need to find this. Wow, this is great. So I turned to Cheryl. This is like March of 2019, this pre-pandemic. I said, sweetie, would you like to go to Wales? How many of you have ever been to Wales? Anyone? A few of you. That's great. Great. Wales is not on anyone's travel list or bucket list. It's a lovely place. It's got a lot. You can travel up the coast. There are a lot of nifty castles, beautiful scenery, very warm people. You can do it in about a week. It's a great place to go. Of course, to get to Wales, you had to go to London first, and Stonehenge was near London, so we decided to go and visit Stonehenge on our way to Wales, and we did that. So here's Professor Pearson. He's a very jolly guy in front of Stonehenge, and I think this next thing. Oh, okay. So here is the outcrop that he discovered, where the bluestones that are now at Stonehenge, at least most of them, came from. It's a big pile of rocks. The evidence is that this has been quarried for lots of reasons, for 5,000 years. And so I was able, this is my credit, I was able to find this place by thumbing through a sheep pasture, avoiding the flaps, and the gullies and all the other things, for about a mile. I finally got there, and it was magnificent. It was a beautiful day, and I could, I was just thinking 5,000 years ago, there were people here creating these big stone pillars with the most crudest of means. Remember, this is Stone Age stuff. So all they really had were, they had no metal tools, right? They had no hammers. They would find natural cracks in this stone, shove a wooden wedge in it, hammer on it until the slab opened, and then they would drag it away. There's evidence for all of that here. So I said, wow, this is great. I'm going to take a sample. Now, I wasn't raiding Stonehenge. All right, this is a public, it's still being used. People still come here to get stones for mailbox posts and stuff. And so I thought I should bring a piece home. So you can see that it's kind of overgrown, and a lot of the stones are really large. So I went looking for a small one, no dice. The only ones that were even, loose were really way too big for my carry-on. What to do? Well, there's nobody around, so I picked one up and I went smashing it against the ground into a bunch of pieces until I found one that was small enough to bring home. I probably check this out afterward. It is spotted. It's a really nifty little stone, right? And it's quite the compensation piece in the Beatty household, let me tell you. So having done that, I got really interested in this whole story. This was new news that we found a place in Wales where these stones had come from. We still didn't know why they dragged them for 100 miles to Salisbury Plain. But this is one of the routes they took. Either they went by land and took by sea, I guess. But it was still an arduous thing to do. And the key seems to be not Stonehenge, but this place called Wamon, which is not far away from the quarry site. It was known to be a partial stone circle. There's only 4 stones, and only one of them is still standing. But they're in a kind of arc. And the question is, could they have been the remnants of a much larger stone circle? And so Professor Pearson took a team out there in 2017 and 18. And you can see the bits of stone that are still there, and they tried to figure out where the rest of the holes were. Now, the neat thing is, we have techniques now, especially ground-penetrating radar, that can determine changes in the density of the soil underneath gravel. If any of you have ever dug a hole and then filled it back in, you know that the character of the soil that you put in has a different density than what you started with. And so even if you fill it in so it's flush with the ground penetrating radar says, there's a hole there. And so they drug this, and they discovered that there were a bunch of holes in the shape of a circle. This was once a full stone circle. And if I'm really lucky, we'll get the video to work here. But I have no sound. One moment, please. I might have to do this myself. I want to insert the time. And I want to go to my desktop. It should be the video. Oh, I have sound turned on. There you go. Aha! There it is. Okay, so let's go back to this one. Let's see if we can get this.
As one hole after another was unearthed, the shape of the circle was revealed. And its dimensions got the team excited.
Its diameter, 110 meters, was exactly the same as the outer perimeter around Stonehenge. The chances of the two having exactly the same dimensions are really very slim. Winemound could be the predecessor for Stonehenge.
But they needed more proof. Could they find evidence of a direct connection between the two monuments? An odd-shaped stone hole provided an opportunity to once again use photogrammetry.
We could see the exact shape of the base of each stone that had stood in them. And one of them was very unusual because it had a slightly kind of pentagonal cross-section. And what was interesting was that there was one at Stonehenge which had a very similar form.
Could they match the shape of the Wine Mound hole to the stone at Stonehenge? It fitted like a key in a lock. But this evidence alone was not conclusive. They still didn't know when the circle was constructed.
Okay, I think I can fix that. So this is where that editing will come into play. We were discussing this at dinner. Now, since the speakers. Can't send it to the headset. So you maybe step that. Oh,
So can I get a copy of just the presentation or the video?
yeah,
Then
and then you can listen to that. Okay. So, ooh, this is good. So what they did was,
Yeah, you got to start putting sound up on it.
fix the audio as well. Okay, we're back. Sorry for that. So the question was, if you missed it on the last tail end of the video, was okay. The stones were originally blue stones there. Blue stones at Stonehenge that match the composition. The question is, were the stones in the Mound removed at the same time that the stones appeared at Stonehenge? Right? And so they used a technique called optically stimulated luminescence. Essentially, is this: the quartz grains in the holes, in the soil, in the holes, have a memory of exposure to sunlight. The crystal lattice in the quartz gets disturbed in such a way that it's essentially it sets a chronometer, if you will, for when those grains were exposed to sunlight. When they did that, they found that they were exactly 3,000 years old. This might be, let's see, right. And so it was dated to sometime between 3,600 and 3,000 BC. The stones were in those holes and removed, which is consistent with the very beginning of the blue stone appearance at Stonehenge. So not only now do we know that the stones came from Wales and where they came from Wales, we also know that the ones that were in that stone circle in Wales were removed and transported to Stonehenge. Let's see if this works.
It looked very different to how it looks now.
I don't know what to turn on.
The monument we see today dates to around 2500 BC. But Mike's team confirmed the existence of numerous empty stone holes, evidence that the stones have been rearranged multiple times. The original configuration, dating from around 3000 BC, was an enormous circle made entirely of blue stones.
There you go.
That's the right one.
All right, I'll play that one again.
When Stonehenge started out, it looked very different to how it looks now.
The monument we see today dates to around 2500 BC. But Mike's team confirmed the existence of numerous empty stone holes, evidence that the stones have been rearranged multiple times. The original configuration, dating from around 3000 BC, was an enormous circle made entirely of bluestones.
Okay, I'm sorry for that, but let me recap. So the evidence showed that the bluestones were actually in the Aubrey hills. And that over time they were rearranged multiple times. They started out first was in stage one where they were in the Aubrey hills. So the Aubrey hills were never originally intended for cremation. They were for the bluestones that were transported from Wales, having been a stone circle there, to the Salisbury Plain to create a new stone circle. And so we still don't know why they did it. Why did they take a stone circle, a perfectly functional stone circle in Wales, and drag it to the Salisbury Plain? That's still the missing piece here. Now, there's a legendary story from the 1100s that a written record, a written story, a narrative, how Merlin, Merlin, King Arthur's sorcerer, wanted to build a memorial to the English, to dead English soldiers. And so he dispatched an army to Ireland, but in those days, Ireland and Wales were kind of merged in thinking. Dispatched an army to Giant Stanton, Ireland. Now, many of you have been to Belfast, the Belfast area. There is an amazing geologic outcrop on the seashore called the Giant's Crosser, thank you. Giant's Crosser, which is made up of stones that are very much like this. They're called columnally jointed basalt. It's an amazing place. You should go there sometime. And so there's maybe a grain of truth to this legend about these stones being brought from Ireland to build Stonehenge and then erected by, a race of giants. Well, that's a little fanciful, but that's the story anyway. So the question still is, why Salisbury? Why this nondescript plain out in the middle of nowhere? And it was during the excavations about a decade ago that they again went down to the chalk level, and they discovered in the chalk scourings from glaciation from the end of the last ice age, where glaciers were moving over this territory. And it created linear gouges in the chalk that aligned with the direction of the summer solstice sunrise. Now, if you were a Neolithic wise shaman, whatever you want to be, and you saw this alignment, there was something special about it. And so this is the best reason that we have, because the summer solstice was an important calendrical turning point, right? It was the beginning of the end for summer. Just as the winter solstice that we're about to have, right, is a turning point and is widely celebrated originally in Europe and lots of places. The tide was turning and the light was going to start coming back. So this alignment toward the summer solstice sunrise, and also, by the way, to the winter solstice sunset, if you think about it, they're diametrically opposed, probably is the reason. Probably is the reason, at least that's best we know. So we've had these couple of stages where first there was the henge and the Aubrey holes, which eventually took the bluestones. Subsequently, the center circle, what we think of as modern day Stonehenge, took place. But in the meantime, the bluestones were moved around a lot because they were fairly portable, different configurations. Remember, this is taking place over centuries of time. So different generations of the tribal leaders, wherever they might have been, might have had different ideas of where the bluestones ought to be. And so it was in this last, one of these last major stages, roughly around the 2400 BC, that what we know today as the Sarsen Circle came to be. And these stones are sandstone, and they are not from Wales. They're from the immediate area, as you see. Because this is a current map. Every stone, every hole has a number and an identification now. It's been very well characterized. The map, you can see that some of the Sarsens especially are lying on their side. Some of them were clearly must have been broken in falling over, and they're gone, repurposed for something. And so these Sarsens are truly massive stones. They're they weigh about 25 tons. They're 13 feet tall. There were 30 of them. This is the standing one. Right? The capstones are different. But it's a unique construction, unique in the sense that, all right, so first of all, they're sandstone, so they're well shaped, right? They are truly pillars. They're not just kind of, they're actually have been shaped. And the quarry site is not far away, in a place called Marlborough Downs, not far from the stuff. And in those, by then, this is now we're getting into early Neolithic. There were hand tools available. So sandstone is pretty easily worked. And so you can imagine people shaping these stones into the nice shapes that they ended up being. Getting them there was a totally different issue. This is you probably heard that this applies to the pyramids in Egypt. Well, they just put logs on the ground and then they rolled them on the ground like ball bearings. Doesn't work. Might work on asphalt, does not work on turf. Right? Because the stones are so heavy, all the pressure's on the logs get pressed into the ground very quite easily. So it couldn't have been that simple. Maybe a sled, but sled would suffer from the same sort of entrenchment. And I just came across this the other day. Let's see if this works. This is a little video with no audio, so I'm guaranteed it'll work. That maybe they put rows of wood pilings on the ground and then roll the sleds over those. That might make sense. So we'll see. Anyway, whatever the reason, remember, no metal tools, no horses, no wheels. And they managed to move all these stones. Not only did they drag them to the site, but they got them erected and they got the big ones put on top. Now you say, how could they possibly have gotten those big ones raised up there? It's actually pretty simple. What they would have done, let's take those three on the far left. They would have built on the outside a huge earthen ramp, right? Gradually increasing in height until it got to the height of the two stones that they were going to send them. So then all they had to do was drag it up the ramp, put it on top, and then get rid of the ramp. Get rid of the third ramp. So that's probably how that happened. But still, it's remarkable. And there are other things about this that are remarkable too. This is the only known standing stone monument that used not only tongue-and-groove construction, but mortise and tenon construction, the lumps and then the holes that they fit into. Incredibly sophisticated. Now, these techniques were known in Stone Age times, but they've never been used on this scale. And so it's just remarkable. We think of these people as being, they didn't leave any written language, but they were obviously very capable builders. And so this is Stonehenge as it looks today. There's the outer circle of 30 stones, and then there are these 5 inner trilithons, they're called, in a horseshoe shape that are on the inside, and then there's bluestones all over the place. And so that's what we have today. The largest, the trilithons, the ones in that horseshoe, are actually much larger. Some of them are, one of them is 30 feet long, and they must have been, tens of tons. Really hard to move around. Okay, so here we go.
2 miles.
Here's another
Stonehenge
audio
lies
that we're not
buried
going to hear.
walls.
So I'm going to narrate.
Largest Neolithic site.
This is a continuing problem I have with this particular talk. I don't know what it is. Anyway, Durrington walls must have been a settlement. This is where the workers lived,
Temporary homes.
inside this sort of protected enclosure. There could have been up to 10,000 people there. And so nearby, they built Woodhenge,
constructed a huge
right?
wooden circle.
And so this would have been this is why they think this was a monument to the living. Stonehenge might have been a monument to the dead. But you can see here representations of how the different phases happen, and this has to be an internet thing because it's playing great on my this is a bandwidth sort of thing. But in any case, all of this came together by about 2400 BC in the form that we know it today. And so we're starting to answer the question of when it was built and how it was built. The question then was why. And so I mentioned this summer solstice sunrise. This is for those who are need a refresher on this. You know, the Earth's spin axis is tipped with respect to its orbit. And so in June, when the northern hemisphere is tipped toward the sun, we have summer. That's why it gets hot in summer. Not because we're closer to the sun. We'll be our closest point to the sun in about 2 weeks in our orbit. And so also, if it were really about perihelion, then the people in Australia would be having summer at the same time we do, and they don't. So the thing is that there's a tipping, and so as the seasons come and go, I'm sure you've noticed that the sun's path across the sky changes with the season. During the summer, it sets well north of west, well north of east, sets well north of west, and arcs high in the sky. That's why summers are hot. Not only is the incidence of the sunlight more direct on the earth, but the sun is in the sky longer, right, each day. And winter, it's just the opposite. Okay, so therefore, the point for the sunrise changes with the season. And in June, it's farthest north. On the equinoxes, it's due east. And then the December solstice is farthest to the southeast. A little factoid for you to impress your friends. They all know you're geeks anyway, but tell them this. On the solstices, on the equinoxes, the sun rises due east and sets due west everywhere. So if you've always wanted to know where due east is from where you live, the equinox is the time to check that out. Okay, so in Stonehenge's case, there were those grooves that made the alignment. There's the heel stone that I mentioned earlier. And from the inside of the stone circle in its center, the sun rises right over the heel stone at the summer solstice. Now, it's an imperfect alignment, but it's a time for celebration. All manner of crazy people show up. We've seen some of them. There was a time when they were not allowed inside the stones, but in more recent times they have. And this is actually from the 1980s. And there are all kinds of neo-pagan priests and high mucky-mucks and so forth. This guy is named Pendragon, I believe, and he is the Grand Poobah of the Druids. And so it turned out that in 1981, so this is from Stellaria. Look at the day counter down there, clicking through the solstice. The sun moves only a very little bit around the time of the solstice. So to actually pick one day and say, that must be the solstice, was imprecise at best. So they probably had a party for a whole week, I guess, right? But in any case, I need to go back to this. I need to go back to this, yes. So in 1981, I had been dating Cheryl for a few years, and I had a chance to go to England for us. We did a road trip. I had arranged it so that we would be in Stonehenge on the solstice. I played the Sky and Telescope card. I got a pass to get us inside. We got in there, and it was foggy, unfortunately. We didn't see the sunrise. But we had a lot of interesting experiences. I made beer, and I'll tell you all. Cheryl, who claims to be part Druid anyway, thought this was a really momentous occasion. And in fact, in her mind, I had gone to all this trouble to propose. Kelly was clueless. He did not propose. Cheryl went away disappointed and Kelly was excited because he'd seen, that somersault. Okay. But there's a happy ending, I guarantee. All right, so remember this. This is the first stage of Stonehenge. And remember those 4 stones? Why only 4 stones? Why in that location? Stone circle was centuries in the future. Well, it turns out that those 4 stones also align with the sunset and the sunrise. And so maybe this was known even from that road. They did discover the grooves of the chalk, right? So they used the 4 stones because it only took 2 points to figure out where the sunrise was going to be. They didn't have to have a whole stone circle. And so it's probably been in the DNA of Stonehenge for a very long time. Now, is that all there is? Was it just, they put all that trouble just for the somersault to sunrise? Lots of people have tried to tackle this question. And one of them was a guy named Gerald Hawkins. In the 1960s, he said, well, maybe it has to do with lunar alignments too. Now, it turns out that the moon's orbit is tipped 5 degrees with respect to the plane of the Earth's orbit. And that's important because if they were the same, we'd have lunar and solar eclipses every month, but we don't. So it's tipped a little bit, and not only is it tipped, but the moon's, that plane of the moon's orbit, because of perturbations by the sun and Earth, actually precesses around, and this little video will show that. It's called precession of the nodes. The node being the intersection line between the Earth's orbit and the moon's orbit. You see it moving here. It's just 5 degrees. And so over a period of 18.6 years, the plane of the moon's orbit actually cycles around, right? And so its position in the sky can be, depending on where you are in the cycle, plus or minus 5 degrees for a total range of 10 degrees. So like at one point, there's the sun over there, there's the moon here. So at one point, at full moon, right, the moon might be 5 degrees above the ecliptic, and then half a cycle later it could be 5 degrees below. And so consequently, from the standpoint of Stonehenge, yes, every year there's a point where the moon is farthest north when it rises, and a point where it's farthest south, just like the sun. But because of this plus or minus 5 degrees, there's some slot there. And it turns out that this guy, Gerald Hawkins, concluded, he said, these Stonehenge builders, they had figured this out because they had been watching the sky for hundreds of years. They knew about this precession of the nodes. Actually, it's called regression. And so they built a lunar calendar into Stonehenge too, to measure these things. And so Hawkins looked at all these holes, the Aubrey holes, and he worked the precession back so he knew which way when the solstices and equinoxes, and he came with all kinds of alignments, and you see them here. They've never been proven. It's an interesting speculation, but there are so many holes around, you could draw 2 lines, get anything. So Hawkins has never really caught on. Just recently, a whole new concept came out by a Stonehenge researcher named Timothy Darwell, also in England. He said, there's some interesting things about the sarsen stones. They're not all the same size. Look at the one on the left, it's skinny, and the one on the right is pretty thick. Why is that? It turns out that there are 30 sarsen stones, and every 10th one is skinny. Here's a little chart showing that. Okay? The height is not the height of the stone. It's the width of the sarsen stone. And you notice 21, which is here, right? And 11, which is there. They're short. They're substantially, they're substantially skinnier. And if you look at the spacing between the stones, it's very even. The blue lines show the spacing between the stones. So you have, they weren't sloppy about this. They spaced the stones evenly, but every 10th one is a stone. Why is that? There are 30 stones. Does that sound familiar to any of you astronomically? 30 days basically in the lunation, 29 and a half days from new moon to new moon, right? So 30 times 12 is 360. I can hear you saying, Kelly, is 5 days short of a year. Well, we've got these trilithons on the inside, 5 of them. That's 365. And I can hear you thinking, Kelly, what about leap years? Because yeah, a sequence of 4 years, account for the leap years. 1, 2, 3, 4. It fits pretty nicely. I don't know if it's true. It's just one of many speculations, but I gotta say, I really like that conundrum, right? Okay, so that's the news from Stonehenge. How about the real life boots on the ground Stonehenge? You can visit Stonehenge. This is me driving and Cheryl trying to figure out how to take a picture. Cheryl, it's the button on top, the silver button, press it now. This is Stonehenge. It's very close to a major highway that runs through this part of the countryside. And in fact, there's a plan. It is so disruptive. This highway is totally choked all the time with cars. So the British government wants to build a wider highway. And since it's on some of this archaeologically interesting territory, they actually want to bury it completely under Stonehenge in a tunnel and have it come out the other side. It's very controversial. So this is A303 is the road if you want to check this out. Look it up. There's a whole, there have been studies and designs and everything. It hasn't started yet. But they got a problem. You can see Stonehenge in the distance and you can see all the people there. It is a very popular place. In fact, oops, I'm sorry, I see. Okay, so if you were to go visit Stonehenge, the parking lot is way over to the left. They bus you into this location, and then you can walk around. You can see the pathway. You cannot get inside the stone circle itself. 800,000 people a year visit this monument. Busload after busload after busload of tourists. Don't do that to yourselves if you want to go. What you should do, it costs about $20 to get in. What you should do is pay extra $60 to go at dawn or dusk. When you and 30 of your closest new friends hop on the bus and they let you inside for 45 minutes. Nobody else around. And so that's what we did. Cheryl and I, 3 years ago, we paid our $60. We got inside. We got to get, you can't touch the stone, but you can definitely see them. I'm running around taking pictures. The rangers are saying, hey, come back here. You know. And this time, I wasn't going to screw up, ladies and gentlemen. In the middle of our visit, our 45 minutes with Stonehenge, I turned around to Cheryl and I presented her with a lovely Celtic theme, amethyst stone, turquoise stone. And I maybe not completely made up for failing to propose her, but I went a long way toward it. Thank you very much.
Kelly, any porta johns there?
And what?
Porta johns.
Oh, yeah. No, there aren't. However, Cheryl, believe it or not, Cheryl dated somebody before me. And he was a rambling boy. And he went to Stonehenge with his parents. And he came back and he told Cheryl, you know, I went to Stonehenge and they give you a little hammer where you can chip the stone to souvenirs. Ages ago. They don't do that anymore. But yeah, we did find in the stones lots of carvings, you know, like initials and stuff like that. Not overt, but there are plenty of them. You know, they've been standing there for centuries, so they do go through a certain amount of abuse. Not anymore. It's definitely one of the hallowed sites in England, and they treat it with all due respect. If you go to the website that has the most information about Stonehenge is called English Heritage. And you can go there and you can find, that's where I stole everything that you heard here tonight. I didn't, but there's a lot of great information about why the stones are there, what they're doing to protect it, what the scientific research has been. And it's just fascinating to me that so much has been learned in just the last 5 years. It's really put a whole different spin on it. Anybody else have questions?
So if they dig a road underneath it, Not gonna damage anything?
So the question is, if they did a road underneath, wouldn't it damage? If, you know, it's like the big dig in Boston, if you put the tunnel deep enough, not only do you not disturb anything on top damage wise, but you would miss any possible artifacts that would be, right? Because they wouldn't be 40 feet down. Well, that's true. I'm sure they would put it in giant pipes. Yes, sir.
Is that the one still around, you still alive?
I don't know. I don't know. This question is Gerald Hawkins still alive? I don't know the answer to that. He wrote that in 1965, so that was 60-ish years ago, right? I would be surprised, but I'll check that out. It's a really good question.
My father was an activist in the 70s, just after the book had come out, and everybody was questioning.
Yeah.
Presenting.
Yeah, because the moon alignment, you know, there are some people who think you can take that 18.6 year regression cycle and it's not far removed from the sorrow cycle for predicting eclipses. So there's some thought that perhaps it was the eclipse calculator too. The Maya, for example, had a calendar, this long form calendar that actually did predict eclipses. That's a certain. And so who knows? But there's no evidence that it was for eclipse. And there's really no evidence other than what Hawkins came up with for these lunar alignments. You're not going to let me get away with just 2 questions. Go ahead.
Well, you have found stuff, the stars and stuff.
Oh, okay. Your question is, I'm doing this for the people online. The bluestones, we know, were about the stars. They're from a site called Marlborough Downs. I did show one picture quickly, about 20 miles to the north of Stonehenge. So they're sandstone. They're not igneous rock. They're sandstone. And they're big slabs of them lying all over the place. And they would be pretty easy to shake into, relatively shake into these big pillars, the stars, getting them, but they weigh like 25 tons. So there's still the transportation problem. But they were locally quarried and locally shaped and locally transported. Okay, last but certainly not least, our newcomer from Putnam.
Okay. So, this was done without a written language. You know, the Aztecs and the Mayans had a written language, and they were able to do historical records and very quickly. I guess my question is, how is that you can maintain a history of what's happening over the long periods, decades and decades of time?
That is a fabulous question. All right, so this question is, they had no written language, they had no records to pass from generation to generation. How do you maintain the knowledge of what Stonehenge was supposed to do, right? Or to keep the flame alive for building it over these centuries if all you had was an oral history, basically. Boy, I wish I knew, right? I also wish I knew how they got those big stones to stand upright, because it's just guesswork on the part of modern engineers. This is the Enigma. This is why it's the epic Enigma. This fantastic stone structure, the most sophisticated of its kind in the world in terms of standing stones. I mean, the pyramids are pretty sophisticated, but they're not standing stones. So a little asterisk there. And yet, no written records whatsoever. Nothing inscribed in the stones, no runes, no. Even at Newgrange, Newgrange has in Ireland, the stones that are facing it have, you know, Celtic spirals. It's not language per se, but at least it's something. Nothing here, just the stones themselves. They are mute testament to what happened 5,000 years ago. And maybe we'll leave it at that. Thank you all very much.
A bunch of photographs here. They were taken by Ken Kramer, who visited us a few years ago. He actually thinks pictures of the answer of the date. Anybody wants to take one home, please feel free to do that. See the person that's there, do whatever you need.
Right here. Yes.
Yeah, it's on the right now.
What can I do to help?
Well, I did check in with her. To visit, but as I said, it's, stones are still here locally, you know, stones are, you know, maybe around there. Like, you know, it's same thing, problem.
I didn't take it out, I'm not sure.
And so I, you know.
Do you know the change?
Ask them.
No. Get this picked up, it's already.
Well, listen,
That word is.
part of my reminder.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure it's gonna be no problem. It's not the good days. But we gotta get it out. You know, it's
Yeah.
Okay.
That, I've got a 20 too,
Yeah.
and I have another kid. But
The other guy is, I don't know why they're not. They probably said it all the way here.
And you know, we have one edge here, instead of the back.
Once they get like around.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. But it's very
To be in that office, but I don't think that's the last thing that's on.
It's like.
Now, if you
In the back, have to look around the heads.
Yeah.
Bring this back.
Yeah, actually. Okay. Okay, no, that's. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about stuff that's in mountain.
Okay.
Okay. But I'll just give you after.
Want to get together sometime?
After. Okay, all right, good job.
Thank you.
Oh, and all of this feedback and stuff, you're doing between this, the microphone, this.
You have my microphone.
Yeah, right.
Have the same time, make sure.
Okay. With Kelly now, right? If he sends me, you give him my email, to check your office or email, give me that presentation of the video. And I'll
You know
put,
what? I know. I can sort it.
well, that's okay. If you want it in there, let me have it. I'll put it in at the right spot.